25. Takuda was right. Everything about this situation was new and different. The humans were the ones who were the aliens. They had always believed one should change the environment to fit one's needs, seizing anything they wanted or needed and molding it to their requirements. Now, it was the reverse. The Tatate were the ones who fit the environment. The humans were the outsiders. Not only were they outsiders, they were also unable to change the surroundings to suit their desires. The humans did not have enough of anything to fill their needs. They could survive on their own for a while, but sooner or later they would exhaust their meager supplies. They would have to adapt or perish. Takuda was one of the first to accept the reversal. He, who had been a member of a rigid hierarchy for his entire life, seemed to find it easiest to change. Perhaps it was the responsibility for the lives of the others that made him open to the necessity. Perhaps it was in his nature. In either case, he listened to the words of Dakota and the others and did what was necessary. By the third day in the caves, the humans were well enough to travel. Takuda decided that it was time to act, even if there was no real plan. The mercenaries had been given 3 days of grace to deal with the enclaves, and it would take more days for his team to reach the river. They would have to move, and move with purpose. The Tatate had been helpful during the recovery, feeding the humans and generally fussing over them at all times. There was something unnerving about having one of the little creatures squatting at your feet when you fell asleep, and even more unnerving to awaken with him still there. They seemed to have the ability to sleep with one eye socket closed and the other open and alert. Very weird. The humans got used to it, each one according to his nature. Andy Holland was the first. Dana Lost only grudgingly. Before they could move, Takuda had to reorganize his team. The casualties suffered by the DEST members made it even more imperative that Jacobs improve his mech piloting skills. Goodall worked with him throughout the hours of daylight and on into the hours of darkness to get him up to speed. She was sure that with enough training he would become a good pilot, but time was one thing they sorely lacked. Under normal circumstances, it would take weeks simply to master the maneuvering of the complicated machine. That was one of the functions of the neurohelmet. With the helmet linked to his brain, a mech warrior could maintain fine balance without conscious thought. But no matter what Goodall and Jacobs did, they just couldn't get the helmet to work well for Jacobs. Perhaps it had been damaged in some indecipherable way, and that was what made it do strange things at the most unexpected times. Goodall simply didn't have weeks to train Jacobs. The weapon systems were another problem. After mastering the machine, a pilot would normally be expected to spend additional time on the range. It was not so much that he had to learn to shoot, but that a mech warrior had to become aware of the heat surges that the weapons transmitted to the mech. Heat was the real killer of mechs on the battlefield, and more than one pilot had ignored the climbing heat indicator at his own peril. In that way, the Locust was in its element. The light mech had enough heat sinks that it could bleed off all the heat it generated, either by maneuver or fire or both combined. Goodall saw no reason why Jacobs had to be warned about heat. They'd save that subject for later discussion. When the two pilots weren't maneuvering the mech through the woods, they were talking about how a mech worked. Goodall talked tactics and deployment of the mech lance until she had Jacobs convinced that the mech was the ruler of the battlefield. Then she had to turn around and teach him that the king of the battlefield was vulnerable as well. There were many things, she explained, that mechs did poorly or could not do at all. She was adamant about fighting in towns. Those were places that a mech should avoid. Heavy vegetation and steep defiles were another hazard. Mechs liked open, rolling terrain, she told him. No steep defiles, no heavy woods, no buildings, and no infantry. Infantry could be deadly if not treated with respect, and mech-proofed infantry like the Dest team should be avoided at all costs. The two mech pilots were supported by Sagiri Johnson and Underos Yapudi, the remaining techs. Technical support for the mercenary lands had been thin to begin with, and with only one tech for each mech, the Takuda pilots had to do much of the work themselves. Jacobs was perfectly happy tinkering away on his machine with the help and direction of the two technicians, and Goodall was humble enough to wade into the grease and oil as required. Vost would never have gotten his hands dirty on a mech, even his own, but the two pilots and two techs with Takuda were perfectly happy working together in the innards of one of the locusts. They were even able to repair and replace the shattered windscreen on Jacobs's mech. The Tatate had shown the humans how to heat and bend a lovely, clear crystal sheet found in veins in the caves. It wasn't as strong as the original material, and it would shatter in the most inconvenient way if struck by a heavy object, but Jacobs could at least see through it. Organizing his team had turned out to be an even more difficult task for Takuda. He made Parker DeVood his aide in the headquarters section, which meant he could move George Bousteau into Arsenal section. The heavy weapons section would have to operate a man short, for there was no way to replace Inaduma. Sine would have to double as both section leader and anti-armor specialist. She was perfectly capable of handling the job, capable of any job requirements in any position within Dest, but the move would put a strain on the section's capabilities. And so, after 3 days of rest and recuperation, Takuda took his troops toward the setting sun, the enclaves, and a tentative future. The foot troops moved first, the mechs bringing up the rear. This allowed for security ahead, while Jacobs and Goodall continued to maneuver and train together. Jacobs learned as he went, and improved. The first day he toppled the locust twice. The second day, only once. On the third day, he was able to maneuver without mishap even when putting the mech into a run. That evening, as they bedded down the equipment, Jacobs emerged from the cockpit with a beatific smile across his face. He was doing what he'd always dreamed of. The trek was difficult because of the terrain and the material carried, but it would have been impossible without the Tatate bearers. As in the retreat from the dropship, the Tatate carried much of the excess equipment. They were superb at the job, carrying heavier loads than the humans expected, and at greater speeds than even the unencumbered humans could manage. The only problem with the Tatate was their invertate curiosity. At the end of the first day, Takuda was appalled at the condition of the cargo. Every weapon, sensor device, and heavy missile had been disassembled. The pieces were piled in the center of a ring of chattering aliens who then passed various pieces around the circle. Takuda was sure that everything was lost. Certain that it would take days for the Dest members to reassemble the parts, he took Takuda aside and commented on the problem. The little Tatate was surprised at the Dest commander's concern, and he assured Takuda that all would be well. He gave a short command, and as if by miracle, the Tatate put it all back together. By the fourth day of the trek, it became obvious that the enclaves were near. Areas that had obviously been cleared with a purpose rather than naturally began to fall across the line of march. At first, Takuda chose to bypass them, but by the middle of the day they were too numerous to avoid. In any case, they were deserted or abandoned. Some had once had structures on their perimeter, but an examination showed that these had been unoccupied for some time. In some instances, there were signs of violence. The Dest group proceeded with caution. As the last rays of the sun sliced across the sky, turning the undersides of the clouds into puffy peach confections, The open, sweeping savanna appeared at the edge of the forest. The desk members strung out along the verge and settled into hide positions. They all knew that this would be a cold camp. The enemy, or the possible enemy, was in sight. The mechs remained 2 kilometers behind in hide locations of their own. The desk members lifted their range-finding binoculars and swept the ground. A quick look and then a detailed search from near to far, left to right to left. To their wonderment, they discovered that a battle had been in progress here, though it appeared that the battle was over, at least for today. To the right, a force was withdrawing to the north, dragging what equipment it could. The southern force showed no intention to pursue. The fight must have been a draw. Takuda tried to identify the equipment he saw, but it was impossible. It was not that the gear was too far away to see, for his binoculars were capable of 400 times magnification, with white light, IR, and ultraviolet receptors. It was that he didn't understand what he saw. That the forces were not using modern power sources was immediately obvious. In almost all cases, huge stacks pouring smoke rose from the centers of the vehicles. The nearest one, its stack thrusting out from the right side and belching fire, had a great box-shaped housing on its back. As Takuda watched, the housing rotated slowly until a great gun with the diameter of a trash can pointed southward. The vehicle shuddered to a halt, and a moment later a great gush of flame roared from the muzzle of the gun. Takuda saw a huge black projectile arc across the intervening space between the two forces to smash into the ground and then bounce along toward the enemy. He could see figures scampering away from its path, until the ball vanished into a clump of trees. Then the firing vehicle belched fire from its horizontal stack and began to waddle its way north. The battle mechs were nowhere to be seen, nor was there any evidence that they had ever been there. PPCs, lasers, and even short-range missiles would have made short work of anything Takuda could see. He was amazed. With all the technology these people must have brought with them, what he saw was now a throwback to earlier times. Davood flopped down next to his position and also scanned the field with his glasses. "I don't see much iron," he said. Takuda blinked. Davood was right. He scanned the retreating vehicles again, paying particular attention to the tank-like engine that had fired the projectile. The cannon itself had the dark look of iron, but there was no other evidence of the material. Most of the external fixtures had the look of bronze and copper. That was impossible, of course. But then he remembered the enthusiasm of Seagroves and the rumors of what he had seen in Usagumo. Other metal on the wheels showed of brass and copper, but almost no iron. This was a strange society. Darkness fell over the field. The soft glow of lights from the enclaves north and south reflected against the gathering banks of clouds. The field of battle lay dark and abandoned. Even the IR sensors of the rangefinders could find no sign of life except for the soft glow cast by the debris of wrecked and burning vehicles. The combatants had all gone home for the evening. It was a strange war at best. "I guess I don't understand these people," said Davood.
"Neither do I, but I think we'll have to make contact. It seems that our mercenary friends haven't made a deal yet. I didn't see the mechs or any evidence of them. Maybe we still have time to make our case."
"Those mercs are going to be a tough group. They have the power and a head start on us." Davood crawled back into the deeper woods. "I'll get the group together. Do you want to talk to the pilots at the same time?"
"No," said Takuda. "We'll send out patrols first. I'll go back later and brief the pilots and the techs. We might want them for support later on."